Okay, so the video's running. Basically, what I want to do today is talk through the Python Club a little bit and get you guys going on to the next phase, which is building it, adding data, and then doing some SQL. And I'm going to try to cover most everything it's left to do with Python Club. And then next week you can do it on, because I won't be here, right? So you can do it in here. The classroom will be open. If you have it on your own machine, you can do it there. You know, so you ready for that? I'm actually hoping I don't get on any juries, but we'll see. So I am going to, let me zoom. Okay, so I'm going to again bring up Workbench. So I just type WOR, or you can do MySQL Workbench. And what we'll do is, as I said, we'll go through and talk through the Python Club really quickly. Most of what I saw, because I did grade yesterday afternoon, looked pretty good. And I didn't do real detailed comments on most of them because I was going to go do this today. But most of them looked pretty good. So I am going to do a whole brand new model, and we'll walk through this and create, I'm going to call it Python Club C. How many of these have I done? So remember what I did. Now, if you have your model, you don't have to necessarily do this. The other thing I will say is that what we do here, talking about it, may not map with what you did exactly, but yours might be okay. There's a lot of different ways to interpret how this should be done. So there are variations that are possible. You guys remember how to do this? I just did File, New Model. If you have an existing model you want to work off, you just do File, Open Model instead. Right? If you want to just open your model. And then I'm going to add a diagram. Okay, so this is Python Club 3 with an added diagram. You guys with me still, or do you have need a moment? So quiet.
No, I'm not in the right place.
Okay, well, let me look.
I'm not sure where I am.
So
It made me have to log in using your password.
Right, it always is.
So then where exactly?
So down here, type WOR. Yeah, there it is. Something like that. And you guys had a editor for it.
Yes.
So you just do file. Yeah, unless you want to work from scratch, I think you guys is pretty good.
I can add on to whatever
you can add on. Yeah, if you have an existing one, you can add on to it, or you can.
So it doesn't appear that
Let's look on here. Let's do WOR. The Workbench.
and we downloaded it.
Yeah. Although I am thinking, are you in the virtual machine? That's what it would be. Yeah, so let's just do and then we'll just and it looks like it's there. Yeah, actually ready to go. Anyone else before we get going? Are you guys okay? We're still on the virtual. Totally. That looks good. Yeah. And then just a file model or open model. You can work on the one we did last time if you want. In fact, if you've got a good model, you don't have to. You guys want to work? Here's a question. Do you guys want to work through a group discussion of this? Yes? Okay. I'll give you a second to get logged in too. Anyone else have trouble getting in, or okay, you guys are okay back there? For whatever reason, this is not really relevant. I have trouble getting to that back corner. So if you guys need me, make sure you wave me back. All right. Ready to start, or you need a minute? Again, if you have one, you don't have to necessarily change it. So I'm adding a table, and you guys can kind of tell me what to add. We'll call this one member because most of you did that. Now, here's a question. Some of you did person, right? Remember how we did that in Vince's? We did a person. You could do that here if you want. Because you have different kinds of people, right? You have speakers and then you have members. Or you could put them all, you know, you could have your members and your speakers as separate. It's sort of up to you. Anybody have a preference? Let's start with member. We might make some adjustments. My goal is to not let this go much beyond, take like 45 minutes to do this, which may take a lot longer, I don't know. But so you can leave this, I added a column down here. So ID member. And if you don't like ID member, you can change it. I'm probably just going to leave it. I'm going to do primary key, auto increment, int, right? What other columns do I need?
Name.
Yeah, so we might want, you could either do their whole name or you could do last name, first name. I'm going to do member, last name. Bar car 45 looks fine. I'll do member, first name. That's not how you spell that. And I will do that. So I want to do it all lowercase letters to be consistent. Doesn't matter. It's not case sensitive. I don't know if I like that. Let's do L.
Black camel case.
Yeah. It's more readable that way, I think. I'm not going to make it require, well, actually, last name we want. This should be first name. I've had lots of coffee, but I'm still having troubles. So first name I'm not going to make required. What else would we want? Probably member email for doing this way. And I would probably make that required. And I might make this a little longer. 45 is probably enough, but I'm going to do like 150. And I'm going to make it unique so that emails have to be unique.
How do you make it so it's required?
By saying not null, putting a check under an in, right? And again, if you wonder what those things stand for, they're all down here. Primary key is PK. Binary is the B. Not null is the NN. Unique is the UK. Binary unsigned means if you're using an integer or a float, it doesn't. If it's unsigned, that means there's no negative numbers. Zero fill. It's basically if it's a numeric type, do you want to put a zero there instead of a null if you don't put in a value? That's actually a serious thing to think about because it does affect averages and things. And then generated is, again, we're not going to use it. It basically creates an unique identifier, a UID. AI is auto incremented so it'll count the things. You look like you had a question. Okay? Yeah, you just were looking at me like you had a question.
No, I am listening.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
It seems fairly ignorant to ask, but making the email unique, why did you do that? Or what does that mean exactly?
It means that you can't repeat the same email for two different people.
Which I didn't think you could do anyway. This
But
guarantees
but this guarantees that. And it's one way to make sure that you don't accidentally enter the same person twice. There's nothing that, if you don't make it unique, there's nothing in the database, because this is just a number. There's nothing in the database, the table, that keeps you from entering the same person multiple times. But if you make one of the columns unique, that should be unique, like the email, then it will protect you from accidentally entering the same person multiple times.
When might we actually want to use the generated?
So one of the things that I use it for in the Community Assist database, which we looked at very briefly, is when somebody makes a donation. I did this was in SQL Server, but it's the same basic thing. I did a generated unique identifier as somebody, so that they could come back and have a number or a string to check on their donation. So they would be given that. They don't need to be given the key to the table. They just need to be given that.
So auto increment is for the primary key.
Yes, it's for the primary key.
Generated is not.
Generated probably shouldn't be for the key. It is possible, but if it is for the key, it can't be int.
What would happen if you check both auto increment and generated?
It'll throw an error.
Okay.
So you specified 1 to 50 right there, but down below where it says data type, it didn't auto update. It still says 45.
Where?
Right here.
Oh, there. Yeah. It should. Let me see if I click out of that and then click back. Oh, there it is. So I think it's just the environment wasn't updating, but I think it actually does make the change. There are a few things that we'll see along the way too, where it doesn't actually, the environment doesn't keep up with the changes. Although I think this is a pretty nice environment for free, and it's always free to anybody. It's open source. It has a few problems, but it's mostly okay. All right, so that's good enough for member. What other tables do we need? So if we want officer, there's a couple of ways to do officer, and I actually do think a table for it might be good. Some of you did it other ways. Some of you just did a list of what officers there are. So let's do that. Let's do this as a lookup for officer. And I'm going to, do we want to, let's say officer. Yeah, let's do that. I'm going to say officer name in the sense of position name. You guys, you might have a better, and I'll make it not null because we need that. This one I'm going to do as office description, which I'm going to allow that to be null because I don't really want to fill that in. But I'm going to make this as like 255. But I'm not going to, I'm going to let it be null. So this is sort of a lookup table for what officers are. This is not how most of you did it. And there are a couple of things that people did. One of them is that they put officer over here for in member. So that if a member was an officer, you could mark it true or false, or what the key is. I would probably do it more like this, where I put a linking table in. And I would say officer, this one I would name as officer member.
Would you need a linking table? Because one officer can only be one member.
I know, but you might want to keep track of it over time. You know what I mean? So there's a president this year, but there's a different president next year, or it might change. And you might want to know who was president last year. Right? So I think that this actually makes sense to have as a linking table if you want to keep any kind. And I'm going to not make it it's a little bit different than a linking table because I'm also going to do, what do we want to call it? A date for when they were made officer. Date elected. What? I will add foreign keys, but I'm not going to write them in here. Date.
Start date. maybe.
Start date sounds good. Now you could put an end date too, or you could just assume that the next person that has that position supersedes them. But let's do a date, start date anyway. And I'm going to make that a date. I don't care about the time there. Going to make that not null. Now I didn't put foreign keys in here because I'm going to use the dashed one here. I'll click here and then here, and it gives me my member foreign key. And I'm going to click here and here. No, I did it the wrong way. My instincts are still to go the other way. So I deleted that. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do here, here. And then it'll give me my two foreign keys, the member and the which officer it is, and then it'll give me the date that they started. Does that make sense? That gives you a historical view of the officers. So when you do these connections, unlike SQL Server, my brain is still SQL Server oriented. You don't go from primary to foreign, you go from foreign to primary. And you don't drag, you click, 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 click. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Last time we did a identifying relationship with the solid line.
You could. The reason I didn't do that is because I have some other information in here too, with the state and the.
Does it just make it one?
Yeah. And also you might, the same person might get elected to the same office more than once.
And then that would,
Yeah.
That's what I was about to ask. If somebody got elected, stopped, got reelected, would that still work?
It will work with this. It wouldn't work if I made these identify. What, like the normal linking table? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. That's one reason I didn't do it, is because you could get the same office more than once. But this will give you a historical record of who held the offices, which is really useful when you want to, you know, attribute blame or something. All right. Questions on those? This, I mean, this is it's an interesting environment. Couple of things that people were doing. A lot of people use the solid lines for all of their connections. Don't do that. It makes a nightmare mess. It basically makes every foreign key part of the primary key. So you end up with tables that have composite keys with 5 or 6 sometimes columns in them. And if that has a child table, the key is all 5 of those columns. You have to copy all of them into the child table. That just is a mess. It also makes data entry nightmarish. I really, as I said, this is a very subtle distinction that I kind of wish MySQL didn't enforce. Yeah.
So it's like a composite key.
Right. So if you do this as I'll show you. So let me go down into the properties again. If I were to take member ID and make it part of the primary key, notice how the line turns solid.
And then both those together create one composite key.
Right. So it has a key. Notice it has 2 Yeah, so now it has a composite key with 2.
I thought it was illegal to have more than 2 composite keys.
Well, no, there's only one key. A composite key is a single key that has many parts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it can actually be 5, 10.
It can be
whatever.
5, 10. I think it's really stupid to do, but yes, it can be.
How would you ever end up with that situation? Like,
Well,
if
by
you-
using, so one of the reasons why the auto number is really popular as a key is that it tends not to end up with that kind of problem. But think about if you didn't use a composite, and it wouldn't apply to this, but say that you had the way they do classes here. So you have a number. I think, are we 3176? We might be 3175, whatever. So you have a number, but that number is not unique. They use it over and over again. Right? So that can't be the key if you're going over quarters. So then you can do quarter, but then again, the quarter, even the pair of these isn't unique because the same quarters repeat every year, right? So you also would have to have year. So if you're just trying to find columns that are unique, you would need all 3 of these to uniquely identify a section. All right, so you could do that. You could make a composite key with those 3 things. And then you'd have to repeat it wherever you have a relationship. It's easier just to give it an auto number, right? And to have all those fields in there, right? But yeah.
Last question.
No, these are fine. That's good.
Composite key, it will auto-increment both of them?
You can't actually auto increment a composite key. Yeah, you can only auto increment it if it's an integer key.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, auto increment doesn't apply to any other kind of key. There are drawbacks to auto increment keys, just as but they're not things that we're going to encounter. The problem comes if you're trying to merge data from 2 databases that both have auto incremented keys, because there's going to be all sorts of key conflicts. And that's actually where it gets to be difficult, is if you need to merge data from 2 databases, both of which have auto.
One, and then made it a 2, and then other one was a 1.
It's you basically have to remove all the keys and then restore them, and it's a pain.
Yeah, that's not very cool.
Okay, what other tables do we need? These are good discussions. That's actually the point of the class, is the discussion of what these things mean, as opposed to just getting them done.
Should we have an announcements table?
Possibly. What do you guys think? So there's a couple of ways to handle announcements. One is that they're just kind of inherent in the events and the meetings, or they could be their own thing. I'm ambivalent, actually. Yeah.
So we had to establish a permission for an event to be started by an officer only as opposed to not numbered. How did you do that one?
So part of that, I will show you when we do. So I'll show you when we do permissions. But one of the things you can do, so this is table 1. Let's make this one a meeting right now. And we'll come back to announcement. So I'm going to give it its own ID meeting. All right, and then I'm going to, we'll do like meeting date, and that'll be not null, and that needs to be a date. Now you could do date time, which would have the date and the time, or you could do, I think it actually makes a little sense to do date and then do time. So I'm going to do time. I'm going to put a number in there. It goes away, but I think it's still there. Well, maybe not. But it won't. It'll complain if you don't put it there. I'm going to put. What do I want to put here for the other columns? Possibly. Meeting topic, and I'll do that, and I'll make this a little bit bigger for that. I'm going to add a couple of other things. Actually, I don't want this there. Why isn't it not deleting? There it goes. Took it a while. All right, one of the things that I'm going to do, where are we? Oh, I see. Okay. And I'm going to close this so I can get to show it. We'll make an officer. We'll put an officer's ID in there. They're the ones that posted and generated it, if that makes sense. Some of this you do on permission levels. You say that only somebody in the officer that's in the officer group has permissions. We haven't done that, but they're not actually in the tables. But rather than linking this directly to member, I will link it to officer member. That makes sense? So which officer did that? The other thing I'm going to do, I didn't put location there, but I think I would make a location table for a lookup. A lot of you guys did this, some of you did not. And I'll make a primary key, location name. Just leave that as not null. So address. I'm going to give it like 100 characters. I'm assuming that these will all be in the city, the same city, but let's do 45 is probably enough for a city. We could also give it a default. Seattle. Will it allow that? Yeah. So it'll give it a default. It'll, by default, if you don't enter anything, it's in Seattle. Zip code. And I would make it character also. Yeah. So, but I would probably, what is the, so let's do like 11. The last thing I'll do is like, do we want email or URL or phone? Let's just do a phone. And I want to make the these not null too. And the phone, what is, how many characters do we want it to be?
Could you just use int?
I wouldn't. And the reason I wouldn't is that there are area codes that start with 0. And you can't do that as an int. The part of it is that whether you want dashes and parentheses.
Like they're calling from out of country.
Yeah, it could be. So, I mean, you might want, just in general, something like 20 characters or something. Yeah, I'm not sure why they would call from out of country for this, but if they did, yeah. One of the troubles, see, I don't use int. I didn't use int for zip code, and I didn't use it for phone. Part of the reason for that is because you're never going to add, subtract, multiply, or divide zip codes and phone numbers. So I usually use character types for them.
Yeah, because also Canada doesn't have those.
Yeah, yeah. So you might, if you, again, I'm assuming this is really local. But if you were trying to be more international, you'd use postal code instead of zip code because there are different kinds of codes in different countries. There are country codes. You might actually put a country code if you knew it was going to be international. So there are country codes and then postal codes within the countries. All of that, I just wanted a location thing. And in the meeting, I would do, again, I'll post, the meeting would have a location. So I'm going to foreign key, oops, wrong way. Always do that. This is the foreign key. This is the primary key. So even though it's probably only at one location per row, over the time it could be at a lot of different locations. So it's one to many, right? So the meeting has a location. The advantage of doing location as a thing is just to look it up and keep you from having to entering addresses and things over and over again. Does that make sense? Are you guys okay? I'm kind of following what some of you had location and some of you did not. And again, it depends on what you're doing, how useful that is. What do you need to see that I...
When I put the location on, it doesn't let me do the
So did you do you have a primary key location? Yes, you do. And I did bar card. You need to see that part. Oh, you have to close the parentheses. No, that's okay. All right. Now, this is not necessarily clear in my instructions about the thing, so I'm going to put, well, we did want meeting minutes. Let's do that first. And we'll deal with announcements still in a moment. So I'm going to double click this. And I'll call it meeting minutes. I'll give it its own primary key. Have I done auto increment on all of these? What?
Just not member.
I may go back and do some of the others too. Meeting minutes, it'll have a... What else do we want to know about the minutes? We want to know the actual minutes. So let's just say minutes. And I would do, this is one of the times when I'd probably do text and probably medium text. Medium text is still megabytes, but it gives you more than you need. This is the text here, again, isn't stored in the table. It's just stored as a pointer. So you can retrieve it, but you can't actually search it. Does that make sense? And it would make sense that this would be not null. I'm going to put a couple of foreign keys in here. I'll put the meeting and I'll put a member that posts the minutes. Question? Looks like you have questions.
Why wouldn't we put meeting topic in the meeting minutes and meeting description? And put it in the meeting.
Oh, and so I'm thinking like the description in meeting. What do we have in meeting? We have meeting topic. So I was just thinking, you know, a quick description of what the meeting is. Down here we'll have the minutes. Now you could, if you wanted, I'm being fairly loose here, you could also have like the agenda. You know, and that would be like a text document that you could, it's medium text again. You could add the agenda up here. You could do other things. Does that make sense? Down here, this is sort of like what happened at the meeting. What are, you know, the minutes and notes. Typically, and with school things, they require you to take minutes and post them. And it's a good idea in general. That's what I'm thinking here. I'm thinking the date and time is there, so the minutes don't necessarily need a date or time. I think I'm just going to leave this. Again, there's all sorts of things you could add.
Could you just put the minutes in meeting?
Possibly. You could possibly do that. The difference would be, so you would have an empty field here until the meeting happens, and then you'd have to update it instead of add. So there is logically you could argue that it could go in there. And if you do, that's fine. I wouldn't take anything off of that. It makes it a different way of entering it. I guess the advantage of doing this as a separate table is if you had like minutes and then revised minutes, and then, you know, there could be some multiples there, but it either way. So I'm going to do again the dashed one, and I'm going to click on minutes and link it to meeting. I will also link it to probably to officer. So the officer that posts the minutes. So I'm starting to get a web in here. We're almost done. There's only a couple of other things to post: events and resources, and possibly announcements. All right, and just going to, yeah.
If the meeting table is just for one meeting, wouldn't it be one-to-one, like one meeting?
So it is possible that you can have multiple meeting notes. It may not be common, but there could be like revised notes, or you could do one-to-one, but if you do that one-to-one, then the only way it'll give you one-to-one is if these have the same key. So this would be just meeting ID.
So basically this way, the meeting table could have like one person post a topic, then another person posts a topic.
You could have multiple like addendums or opinion, you know.
Would it be okay if you did one-to-one?
Sure, although as I said, it won't actually give you the one-to-one thing unless they both have to share the same key. And if you're going to do it one-to-one, it might make more sense to just put the meetings and the minutes in the meeting. So, and if you do that, that's fine. I'm certainly not going to. In my mind, they're a little bit different than the meeting itself, but it would work there. One of the things, we're normalizing this fairly well. We haven't talked about normalization, but we're breaking it up into little bits, kind of through the normalization process. We might look at it at the end to see if there's anything that violates normal, forms. But a lot of times for content management, they don't care about normalization. They're just shoving things in there so you get them onto the web page. Does that make sense? So what was I going to do as the next table? Resources. And then we'll do events, and then we'll decide so I'll give the resource an ID just like everything else, and I'll make it an AI. I'll have to go and check the other ones before I do it. So the resource, I'm going to give it a resource name. Right. probably give it maybe 200. I don't know how big that would necessarily be. I probably would do a URL, right? Maybe a type. So the question on type, and this one I definitely make bigger than, do we want to leave that nullable? I suppose there's a possibility it wouldn't have a. Questions so far on this? So I got a name and a URL. Some of you have a lookup table for types. Do you guys want to do that? It does help for being consistent. All right, so a resource table for a lookup table for type. The types I'm thinking of, because I think resources is a little bit confusing as a term, and you might have a better term for it. It would be like tutorial or book or just a general website or video, right? These are things that would help you with your Python. So, couple of things. I'm gonna just let that be. We might do a description too. So let's just call it, I'll just do description. Description, do we want to limit it to like 255 characters, or do you want a medium text for that? Let's just limit it to 255. All right. So there's a couple of things I'm going to do. Let's create another table for resource type. There's an instinct that I have that I think some of you have too. A couple of you have commented that there were ghost keys hanging around. Because when you made your, you typed in the foreign keys and then you made your relationship. So you have your typed in keys that are kind of ghosts, and then you have your actual ones. So they're based on the relation. So there's an instinct to type in the foreign keys. And if you're doing SQL or if you're doing SQL Server, you have to do that. Here you don't want to do that generally if you're using the things to draw them, because it'll add them. So let's do resource type. And I don't need a capital E. And I'm just going to do resource type. I'll do that. And I will do just resource type name. And that's all I'm going to do there. So I'm going to do the dashed one. So I did it over here. The foreign key would be in resources, right? They have a resource type. And each members can add. I'm looking for members way up there. That's not good. All right, so a member can add a resource. So I am going to click on that again and click on resources, and way up here click on member. So I'm starting to get a spider web of stuff. So resources, let's see if I can get that where it fits. Resources will have foreign keys for the type, and it'll have a foreign key for the member that added it. And you probably want an add date. I didn't put that there, but that's most things you want a date. So I'm going to just do like a date added, which is also something you might want for members. When I think about it, you know, members, you probably would want like what date they were added. So I'm going to do that too. I'm going to say date joined here just to make it a little different. and turn that into a date also. Okay, so there's only one more thing. Let me kind of kill this just to get a look at this. I don't know if I can get it all on screen. What are you guys thinking of it so far? It's not that different from what a lot of you turned in so far.
Are you able to scroll down to where you did the resource type? Is the resource type a linking table to
Actually, it's just a lookup table.
the lookup table?
So by a lookup table, what it's going to do is it's just going to list the types of resources. Is it a book? Is it a tutorial? Is it just a web page? Is it a video? Is it a lecture series? Maybe a course. You know, they do courses online that you can take for free. You know, different things. Does that make sense? So I think the last thing I'm going to do are events and maybe announcements. We'll talk about that. Whoa, I did not want another relationship. Did that change a relationship? I don't think so. I think I just came down here. I just want to auto increment things that I didn't auto increment. It doesn't matter a whole lot for what we're doing. Meeting, is it auto incremented? No. Location. So I'm just double clicking things to auto increment them if they weren't. Okay, so most of them are. One of the things about this when you're doing this and you're going to forward engineer it, before you forward engineer it, you want to make sure that all your data types are right. Everything is correct, because once you build it, it's harder to fix. It's fixable, but it's harder to fix. All right. This is a mess, and it's partially because of the Zoom, but we need events as well. Now, in order to have events, you might want, I'm just trying to think of where to put this. Maybe over here. I will try to, actually one of the things that I'll do is I'll try to arrange this, and I will post it in Canvas. I don't want to post it online because I use this more than one quarter. But I'll post it in Canvas for you guys if you need it. But your own are good. If yours is fine, use yours. So I'm going to add another table here, which would be, first of all, I'm going to do speakers. Most of you had speakers. So a couple of things about speakers. It's going to have very similar fields to member. So I'm going to do like, this one I may just do speaker name as opposed to first name, last name. I'll make that a little longer. And I'm going to give them an email. And I think that's maybe all I'm going to do for them, other than possibly specialty or something. You want to, something about what a speaker talks about? So I'm going to do that, but I'm going to let that one be null. Might make this bigger.
Would you want to do that if the speaker may speak multiple times about different topics?
Yeah, so that's a question. You might not want it. My parens wasn't closed. Maybe we don't want it.
You have like speaker background.
You could put something like a background. Background might be a better name. because the background might give you more. And then that one I might actually, since it could be fairly extensive, do like a medium text or something. So we talked a little bit about these. Text works also, but you have to put a size for the text. So long text is like 4 gigabytes. That's a lot. You don't need anything that big. I mean, it gives you, it doesn't store 4 gigabytes if you only use like a couple kilobytes, but it just gives you an enormous amount of room. Medium text gives you megabytes, still quite a bit. Tiny text weirdly only gives you, it's the same as a bar card, gives you up to 255 characters. And then text, as I said, is variable. You write how much you want in there. I'm just going to say medium text. It does, again, it doesn't, if you only use 3 kilobytes, it's not going to write a, whatever the length is, 10 megabyte block. It only writes what you actually use. So I did speakers a little bit different than members, but if you combine speakers and members into a person table, that's perfectly fine, and it probably makes some sense. Because a lot of the fields are different. I mean, are the same. The only things that would be different really are this background bit. Because you could break the name into first name, last name, just like the members. But I'll leave this as is for right now. And then I'm going to add an event. And I think this is real unclear in my instructions, but I'm thinking of events as different than club meetings. I'm thinking of events as meetups downtown, as a Microsoft speaker at some, a hotel where everybody's invited, or, just there's a lot of, an event I'm thinking of as different than a meeting. So an event is going to have a time and a place. So first of all, we'll do a date. We'll just say event date. And I'll make that a date. And we'll do event time. And we'll make that a time. I'm going to try putting time without. Does it allow me? No. See, I have to put a value in there, even though it kind of ignores it down below. I'm going to event name. Yeah. I just want to make this a little bigger. And I'm going to, actually, all of these should be not null, probably. And then the last thing I'm going to do this event call, I'll make it event description. And I'll do a medium text on that too. Do I want to make it not null? It'd be nice to have a description, but and probably you would want to do. So, couple of things. An event, I presume, would be posted by a member. So I am going to if I can find it, I'm going to do the dashed one again. This is the foreign key. So now if I can find member without accidentally clicking somewhere else. All right, so there's the member. So a member will post an event. Event will also have a location. So I will click here and here to give it a location.
Did you connect it to officer member or member?
I collected it to member. I think any member can post an event, right?
Oh, I see.
Only officers can post meetings, but any member can post an event. Now, here's the thing with speakers. So an event could have multiple speakers, right? And each speaker could speak at multiple events. So I would do a linking table between those. A couple of things that are kind of interesting. There is a many-to-many connector here. And although I'm going to do a many-to-many between these, notice what it does. It creates a linking table, which is kind of neat.
With that, not a dashed line.
Yeah, it's not a dashed line. So it's doing these are both part of the primary key. So this many-to-many, if you do that, creates a linking table like we've done in the past. It just creates a linking table with just a pure linking table, which is kind of neat. It's not always what you want, but it gives you what. So I just literally did this NM, many-to-many. I clicked on, it doesn't matter which table you click on for that one first, because it's going to basically take the key from both and create a. So this is it, unless we need a table for announcements. You had a table for announcements. They could be, I could see announcements as a separate thing. I can't. Do you guys want an announcement table or not? I see some nods. If you don't want one, you don't have to. The reason why you don't have to is your announcements could be a web thing where basically it's an event or a meeting. But there might be other announcements. So how did you do announcement? Yeah.
I kind of had it, I kind of like linked like the meeting time and things like that, and so that way announcement can be made about the meeting, and then just basically announcement description, so nothing too crazy, and then had the option to link all the information from meeting, so that way an announcement can be made about the meeting and all the things that are there.
But then did you also link an event, which gets, or did you?
I think I was in the process of doing that, and I did it. But that would be another one to look into, to have all the information from events. So kind of left it pretty simple.
So a couple of things. One is you could just do announcements as a web thing, which is not necessarily a database thing, which just takes the meeting or the thing or the event. I will add an announcement. I'm going to make it a little bit vaguer than you did. Because there are announcements that might not involve either a meeting or a.
Yeah, that's why I was, for the most part, like that information. It does not necessarily need to be included, but it's there.
So I'm going to do it as announcement. I'll give it its own key. I'm just going to do this as announcement text. And do we want, I think I'm just going to leave it as varchar, but give it to 255. So it won't be super big. I'm going to make an announcement date. Actually, let's do this as date time. So the moment and the time when the announcement is made. And then we'll tie it to member. And I'm not going to make it a foreign key to message or that, because you could just, this will make it generic, so you could do whatever with it.
What number did you put in the date time?
So if you do a date time, I didn't put it. I used the one without the parentheses.
Oh, okay.
So where is announcement? The other thing I'm going to do is, I think I said any member can make an announcement. So let me kill this here. I'm going to click on announcement, and then I have to go find member. So there's another. Now this is a total spider web of relationships. But I think that we're done, and I'm going to try to arrange it. Yeah.
Could you also link the linking table to announcements? I mean, yeah, so
Which linking table?
if you wanted to put a foreign key of the officer member into announcement.
So I would just do the member because any member could do it. The thing is, if that member is an officer, you could find that out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You really, yeah, so there is an instinct where you want to like cross-reference a lot of things, but that's usually if there's a path between them, that's sufficient. You don't want to have to make 2 or 3 paths between it. Does that make sense? It makes it really hard to enter data, and it may be it may not work. So I am going to try the auto layout. The auto layout here isn't necessarily any good either. That's worse. Align to grid wouldn't necessarily do anything either. I think that's worse. That auto layout is really sucky. I don't necessarily want to spend a long time arranging it though. Let me unzoom for a moment. And then up this. And let's see if I can. So we have event here. Event has a lot of things. We have, why is meeting minutes up above? Just going to do that. As I said, I don't want to spend a lot of time doing this. I'm just going to kind of try to. Yeah, that's not good. Where is event? That could go up there a little, member down a little. Resources, announcements. Resource type, there's no reason for it to be over there. Still got some, there we go. These are a little bit weird still. Location. This kind of covers speakers there too. I'm not sure that's better, but it's not quite as spidery. There's still a bit of that though. Does that make more sense? So I know you can't see everything now because it's tiny, but does this make sense as a structure? Again, if you have a different structure, that's okay, all right? Because there are a lot of variations that can happen. So I'm going to save this model, and as I said, I'll post this one on Canvas, but I'm going to show you the other steps here. And I want to kind of get through everything we would have covered next week as well. So this is why it's a big, long. So I'm going to save the model. File, save model as, and I'm going to call it Python Club 3. I've got a Python Club in there already. Okay, so it's saved as a model. I want to show you how to forward engineer. and then how to enter data. And then we'll talk a little bit about SQL, which is an awful lot to do in one day. It is. So let me zoom again. All right, so I'm going to go back up to here where it says database. Now, this could fail in a lot of ways when you do a forward engineer. I'm just warning you, there are lots of places where it could go bad. If you have a data type that's incompatible, if you have anything that's not fully defined, this could fail. But with luck, this will go straight through. If it fails, you need to go back and maybe fix your diagram a little. So I'm going to forward engineer. Again, forward engineer takes this diagram and turns it into a database. Reverse engineer is also kind of useful, and that takes an existing database and turns it into a diagram. Doesn't remove the database, it just makes a diagram of it. Now, the stored location, you can just ignore that if you want, or we can do local instance. Right? It's the same whether you do that or not. We want to go next. And for the most part, we are going to just leave these blank. So you could skip the creation of foreign keys if you want. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you wouldn't do that. You can generate separate index statements. You can generate insert statements for tables, but we don't have any data. This is not where I would advise you to enter data in that. So there's all sorts of things here. We're going to ignore them all. So we want to go to the next. All right. And we need, if you haven't, so I need the password. I hope you did the advised password of password 1 or something that is easy to remember. If you want to save it in the vault, you can, and then you don't have to do it again. All right, so having done that, is going to export the MySQL table objects. And again, we don't have view objects, we don't have routine objects, we don't have trigger objects, and we don't have user objects, so those are fine. I'm going to do next, and it gives me the SQL. This is actually pretty neat. And if you want at this point, you can copy this to the clipboard or save this to a file if you want the SQL. Yeah. Why does it give you an error? So your password. Yeah. You enter your password. Alright, so do oh, you don't have a connection. Did you install yeah, maybe go back. Yeah. I'll help you catch up with it. All right, so anyway, this is nice to have if you want. It gives you the SQL. You can also make corrections here if it fails, but it's probably easier to make them into the diagram. So I'm going to do next, and it asks me my password again. I'm going to do OK. And if everything goes well, you should get check marks. Okay. And we can, now one of the things is you don't generally want to run this a lot because it doesn't replace what's there, it just sort of jumps it all together. But I'm going to click on the little, there's a couple places you could go. This is the model, so I'm going to click on the little house. And I hadn't connected to the server this time, I just went directly to the model. So if you connect to the server, and there should be, there's my Python Club 3. All right. And if you click, you can actually remove this, which makes it a little easier. This little toggle, you can get rid of the management, instance, and performance stuff and just look at your database. And then you can look and see that we have all of our tables here. All right. So I'm going to go to, just like in SQL Server, you have to enter these in a certain order. Yeah. What? All right. So when you I'm going to do member first. When I mouse over it, you might notice there's 3 different icons. Just mousing over it. The first one is a little eye that gives you information about the table. The second one is a wrench. That allows you to go in and make changes to the table. What you want to do, if you need to make changes, it's better not to go back to the diagram and make the changes. Because if you import in again, it'll just give you 2 copies of the same table. It just duplicates rather than replaces, which is a bit of a pain. The end one here, it has a little grid with, I have no idea what that thing is coming out of it. That gives you, lets you do import. I mean, not import, but insert. So it gives you this little grid, kind of like SQL Server did. I'm going to shrink this. All right, so now the ID was auto-generated, so you can ignore that. I'm going to do a last name. Do you have a good last name for a member? How about Brown? Mark Brown. mbrown@gmail. So I'm just entering the data. The date joined, I didn't make it as a thing, so I'm just going to say, oh, they joined in October. Actually, I think for date here, I'm going to have to do 2018-10 dash, I don't know, whatever day. Okay, and then I can go down and I can enter the next one. Notice it's not numbering these. It won't until we save. One of the things I don't like about this is it doesn't save your data until you click the apply. Right? So let's do, I'm going to do a couple more, maybe just one more. We always have to have a Smith, right? Make it a Sarah Smith. I think the date has to be entered this way, although you can try. Okay. So in order to do this, I have to apply it. And notice it gives you an insert statement, right? You can actually look at it. It generates an insert statement. For what it's worth, SQL Server does this too. When you're doing the form, it generates SQL in the background. It just doesn't show you. So I'm going to click apply. If it's good, it will say execute. It'll give you that blue check. If there are errors, it'll show you the errors. So I'm going to finish. And notice now they have numbers. Once I've applied them, they have the auto numbers. If it's not auto number, you'll have to enter those numbers. And it would throw an error because they weren't auto numbers. Okay. And again, you have to do it on the one side before you can do it on the mini. So let's real quickly, I'm not going to do a bunch of these because I don't want to spend a lot of time at it. But officer is a list of different kinds of officers. So I'm going to click again the little grid. And it generates an SQL statement. Select star from Python officer, right? So I am going to, just real quickly, I'm going to say president. I think I let description be null. I'm going to say vice president. I am going to say secretary.
That's a name. You need a description.
No, these are the names of the offices. I did say officer name. It should be office name. Because this is officer and then there's officer member. So I just named the field wrong, basically. And then treasurer.
So if we named it wrong, can we fix it?
Yeah, let's do treasurer. All right, so let me apply. All right, so I may lose these when I do this, but I'm going to right-click on Office. Oh, I have to close this. All right, so those worked, but let's right-click on Officer. Actually, just mouse over Officer. You could right-click too. I'm going to do the little wrench. And instead of officer name, I'm going to change this to office name. And apply. And apply. And what I'm curious about is if I do the grid here, I didn't lose the data. That's good. So you can, the wrench allows you to make changes as you need. The I is just information, and the grid allows you to enter. So we did office and office member. So I'm going to do officer member. So which member is which officer. And I am going to start date. I'm just going to do 1101. I'm going to do one, and I'm going to make them as the president. And I'm going to do the same date. And do the second member as the vice president. And it should, if I apply that, it should exceed. But it, just like before, you have to do the foreign keys first. So I have to have some members first, and I have to have the officer positions before I can do that entry. Yeah, and the same as before, don't go overboard on data entry. 5 to 10 records max per table, because it's a pain in the butt entering stuff. All right, so is it kind of clear how to do that? Questions? Yeah. Yeah, so if they're not on.
I got that thing. Oh, gotcha.
Sure. So one of the things you want to do if you want to run it again, go back to the server. So one of the things you may not have really looked at is
Yeah, for me personally.
Okay, all right. So you don't want to do that if you have data in it, right? Because all the data would go away. Okay. I don't know. All right, so I want to show you a little bit more. Questions, other questions?
Yeah, I can't click onto the view.
So now when I go to the diagram, it's really accurate. I need to choose one that you'll No, just like what you did right now on the server.
So it works.
This is never gonna be accurate.
You highlighted that table for office or highlight design.
You get one too, but there's nothing. You need to go to number. So now we go to yeah, of course, because they didn't apply it. So then you do it on the side.
But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna post what we did there, so you can use that model.
So I was bumbling around trying to find the workbench while you were already doing diagrams.
You should stop me to remove that. All right.
Well, I don't want to disrupt.
That's okay though. Yeah. So I'm gonna post what we did in class if you want. So. So you want to do it not on the field level, but on the table. So,
they had it down on that last one. So we do the.
Yeah.
This is a part
Yeah. Yeah, you got this. Highlight. Next meeting. Oh, there we go. Yeah.
I have a meeting, I have a meeting, and then I do the meeting. Why do I have a meeting,
All right, so this is meeting.
Yeah.
I'm not sure those should be. So you must have made relationships between, probably made it All right, so typically what an officer could be involved in a lot of different meetings. So the officer will be one side of this. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. Do you have other data in? Do you have other, do you have data in some of the tables? So let's not go back to that model. So let's do, right click on that, and it, just go. Let's do that. All right, so actually, I don't have my foreign key. So you should be able to just delete the.
Yeah, I have the same stuff, so you have to install.
At some point, you might have actually drug it the wrong way and then made it the right way later. But it's not the kind of the ghost of the original one in there. Right, and I think it just left the fields in there, even though it took away the relationship.
Okay, so I need to go through all of these.
Whenever you. So if we do.
So do I need to?
So the wrench shows you what the fields are, right? If you want to, it's just apply this actually. Because if you don't apply it.
Remember how we did?
The wrench allows you to make changes to the. So if the table is okay, so what I would do is go to the table that you need it. As long as it's okay, I wouldn't bother, but if you find it has to be, it's enough to get rid of the wrench. Yeah, so what you do, the little, yeah, so if you go now into office. Yeah, and if you hit the little table, now you should be able to.
Oh,
It would be just the title. Now, the member ID, so again, if we go into the it is not. So you can try to be. So unless you're doing, I'm not sure how your relationships. Let's go with
Okay. Yeah, so then just go back to.
So you actually did what I did. I mean, you did yours resembles what I did.
yeah, it's just that I always was clicking the wrong direction, so you don't have to.
So let's just go back and delete that. I didn't want to delete something else. So if you go back to, local expense, then you can delete.
How do you know when it's coming into
That and because it's a little blue icon, it would be orange if it was a blank. You know what I mean? The triangle would be orange. So it should be fine. I think again, it's just a survival. I don't know profit. If there's a little blue triangle, that means it's not items of one. So it doesn't belong there. Those are fine. Those are perfectly.
And I know.
Yeah, you can always go back and look at that.
I should only take the officer.
Yeah, now, the changes you make in the other one will not reflect back up. Does that make sense? The changes you make here, for instance, those are changes to the actual database. They do not change the back. Unlike SQL Server, there's not a back and forth. So, I mean, in the end, you can backwards generate the diagram from there. But at this point, I think that would be fine. So as soon as it's going to be applied, just make sure it says. And then you should be able to see it. Yeah, so that's and if you look, I mean, those tabs are, although they may not reflect the changes either because of happening. They were. It's a bit confusing. So you should be able to, one of the things you can do is just. Remember, you've got a couple people. Did you apply it? So let's close this. All right, let's close this. And then let's open the. We do that. It's because you have multiple versions of that thing.
And I know this because
Yeah, those are. I would not delete them, but I would close that one. That one's been changed. Just close, close that, close that. This is office, we haven't done that. That's okay. one of the officers, this one has some extra ones, so I would close that. Yeah, that's why it's. And that's the correct one, and I think that's going to apply. And then that's the number, that actually has all the numbers too. So either one of those you can. I think that's good, you can close that because we've made the changes. It was entered. That we should be able to do. No, you shouldn't have to, because we just had that. So close, we close this one. Yeah, I think that we don't. Just, and then it's just. But that's not the right. Close that. When they're open and you make changes, they don't look like the changes. Yeah, now officer name, I'm not sure. It's really right. You'll have to probably put something in there. But. That isn't what I was saying, and I don't think your relationship has it there either. You could just do president. Yeah, I know, but just two fields that are essentially the same thing.
Yeah, I went in and fixed them because I also had type and then I changed to the description.
All right. The other thing I was going to show you was some SQL. Don't know if we have time. Yeah. Yeah, they didn't. That's fine. We have evidence. So I think that is.
Well, I have the event ID event.
I would just not bother.
It's because when you made the table, you made it from the air. This one, you deleted it and changed it. What do you tell me? Yes, that's not my first time with my arrows wrong. So I deleted it and changed it, and then it made extra things that you can't see. And I'm like, no, I don't know what I'm doing. I think the location is usually
This is
in location.
being used upstairs. Yeah. Okay, that looks actually really good. Oh, okay.
Do you have
It's the one I did for last. I'm gonna enter the one from this quarter. Yeah. Okay. What I usually do with the mouse. What I'll probably do is go into the desk.
No.
But so you can forward engineer that. Yeah, go ahead. Do that again. So go ahead and forward engineer it. I don't think we have time for the SQL. You know what I will do for next week? I will post a blog with a link with all the SQL that you would probably want to use. Because I don't think we're going to have time today. And I will post this model as well if you need it.
So I'm going to do that right now. Also, the video is still running and it has all sorts of dead spot at the end. I want to get out and stop the video.